Just imagine a city whose greatest treasure was not its gold, its armies, or its palaces, but the knowledge it held inside. That is exactly what the Library of Alexandria was. Known as the most famous library of the ancient world, it was not simply a building where books were stored. It was part of a great research center in Alexandria, Egypt, called the Mouseion. In modern terms, it was something like a library, an academy, and a research institute all at once. The library began to take shape in the early 3rd century BC, during the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which came to power in Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. The Ptolemies wanted Alexandria to become not only a political and commercial center, but also the cultural and scientific capital of the Mediterranean world. That is why their goal was so ambitious: to collect, preserve, and study as many texts as possible. In other words, they wanted to gather not just local knowledge, but the written heritage of the known world. In this sense, the Library of Alexandria represents one of the earliest ideas of a universal library in history. So, what made this place so special? The most important difference was that knowledge was not only stored there, it was also produced there. The scholars working at the Mouseion were supported by the state. Some lived there, taught there, debated ideas, copied texts, and carried out research. In this environment, mathematics, geography, astronomy, medicine, literature, and linguistics developed side by side. Alexandria's intellectual world is associated with names such as Euclid, Eratosthenes, Archimedes, and Ptolemy. Eratosthenes, in particular, is known to have served for a time as the head of the Great Library, and to have conducted his work there. The collection also grew through a very aggressive policy. According to ancient sources, when ships arrived at the port of Alexandria carrying books or scrolls, those texts were examined and copied. In some cases, the originals were kept in the library, while copies were returned to their owners. Works acquired in this way were even called from the ships. The goal was to gather as many texts as possible, especially the oldest copies, because older manuscripts were believed to contain fewer copying errors. Although the exact number is debated, ancient sources speak of tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, of scrolls. We do not know the precise figure, but it is clear that it was a massive archive. The importance of the Library of Alexandria was not just that it collected a huge number of texts. Its real importance was that it organized them, compared them, and classified them systematically. The Pinakes, prepared by Callimachus, was one of the most famous cataloging works of the ancient world. Made up of 120 books, it classified the authors and works in the library with biographical and bibliographical information. In other words, one of the earliest examples of the cataloging and bibliography systems we use today emerged there. That is why the Library of Alexandria was not just a place that stored knowledge. It was an institution that organized knowledge. The impact of the work done there was enormous. Different versions of texts, such as the works of Homer, were compared in order to establish more reliable editions. Translations were made, commentaries were written, old knowledge was compiled and made usable for new research. Without the Library of Alexandria, many texts from the ancient world might have reached us in a much more incomplete, scattered, or corrupted form. So the library's importance was not simply how many books it contained. Its true importance was that it created a model for how humanity collects, verifies, and passes knowledge on to future generations. So, how was such a great center destroyed? This is where popular storytelling and historical reality begin to differ. Most people believe the library burned down in a single night, but historians say the story was far more complicated. It is possible that the fire started by Julius Caesar in Alexandria in 48 BCE damaged some book depots or part of the library itself. However, many sources suggest that a library tradition continued in Alexandria even after that. Later, the decline of Ptolemaic support, inconsistent Roman patronage, the wars of the 3rd century, especially the destruction during the reigns of Aurelian and Diocletian, and the destruction of the Serapeum in 391 AD, may all have contributed to the gradual disappearance of this great center of knowledge over centuries. In other words, the Library of Alexandria was most likely lost not in a single catastrophe, but through a long process of decline. There is also another important point. A very widespread story claims that the library was burned by Muslim Arabs in the 7th century, but in modern scholarship, this account is considered to have very weak historic. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe.